Hi. Today we're going to talk about research and sources, getting ahead in persuasion. So the research and sources section of your persuasive speech is going to be very important. It figures prominently on the rubric that I am creating for that speech. So first, why research? Um, Most people think, why do I have to do this? Well, I'm going to tell you why. First of all, it increases your credibility as a speaker. So usually in most public speaking engagements that you're going to have, you are not going to be a famous celebrity or a famous doctor or a famous scientist or anything like that. So people will naturally wonder, who is this person up here talking about this and why should I bother to listen to them? Um, Unless you have some kind of terminal degree, typically people are not going to assume that you're an expert. Uh, so experts are people like professors, scientists, doctors, lawyers, others with terminal degrees or considerable clout in their area. For example, as CEO of a successful tech startup company. Elon Musk is a good example. We would consider him an expert since he created Tesla, SpaceX, and a whole bunch of other very successful and high-tech companies. But just because you aren't an expert and you aren't famous, it doesn't mean that you can't borrow from those famous and scientists and doctors and lawyers' expertise. Just remember that you have to orally cite them in the speech and add a bibliography at the end of your presentation, or else it is plagiarism. And if you plagiarize in your persuasive speech, you will be taking a trip down to the dean. So you have to include your bibliography either by PowerPoint slide, or if you're in a public speaking engagement where you're not using PowerPoint, you need to give out your email and make that bibliography available by email. So not only just oral citations, but you also have to present an in-depth record of exactly what you pulled from. Otherwise, you are stealing people's stuff. It's no different than walking into a store and taking, a couple of bags of Twizzlers and some chips and a Coke and then just walking out. That's basically what you're doing, except it's far more, those are a couple of bucks each. There are lots of chips, but taking an idea is even worse because that person spent a lot of time on it. It's their idea, not yours. So, you know, you should have come up with it first and then published it and then gotten a PhD or a degree or something. That takes many, many years, and that's exactly why we assume that these people are experts. They're not always experts. Some of them are idiots, but they have the degree to back them up. I know it's unfair, but this is just the way that it works. So I would be very upset if you know, went and took Einstein's theory of relativity and did not cite that for Einstein. He spent his whole life on that. You didn't come up with it. Second, it increases your own knowledge. Because you aren't an expert, and most of the times you aren't going to be in a situation where you're considered one, um, you're going to want to borrow that expertise anyway. Um, just because you aren't considered an expert probably means that you most likely don't know everything about what you're talking about. Um, and that's true of your job or anything else. Usually when you're giving a presentation, it's hard to do because your boss or whatever comes down and asks you to go and research and figure out and put together and then basically talk to people about or train other people to use something that wasn't familiar to you beforehand. It's an honor if you're asked to do that. It means you're a responsible person and you're good at public speaking. It can earn you promotions, et cetera, which is why this class is important. But when you first start out, you need to increase your knowledge. Research is the only way to do that. And here's the point about increasing knowledge. The prefix that's attached to search, that means to do something over again. So research isn't just search. You don't just do it once. You do it once, you collect what you're doing, you take a look at it, and then you go back and you do it again and again and again and again. Um, and this is a process that helps to increase your knowledge, helps to increase your credibility and your expertise in an area. Doing it, think of it like, I don't know, leveling up in a video game or something like that. You're basically adding experience points as you do it. Um, so, for those gamers out there, it probably works. For the rest of you, it's sort of like an athlete training. You have to, research is basically training your expertise in an area. And finally, research gives the structure to your speech. So we covered structure first. Hopefully everybody's familiar now with thesis, IBC format, which are the ground rules of extemporaneous speaking. But research really is the first thing that you do after you brainstorm and select your topic. So don't brainstorm, select your topic, and then write your thesis, and then go do research to support your thesis. The research happens before the creation of the thesis. So you brainstorm, you pick one topic that you want to do, and then you break that topic down into elements. You pick 3 of those most important elements, or the ones that you most like to cover, and that's your speech. So it's a pretty simple process. Right after you pick those elements, you immediately go and you start researching those elements, and you start collecting sources. So here is just a little visual so that you guys can understand it. As you can see, we brainstorm first. You pick a topic, one thing, and then you break it down into lots of different elements. From that list of elements, you take 3 things that you feel are most important. Bam, those are your body sections, and also that's your thesis and overview. So I gave you guys a lot of feedback on this. Pretty much everybody did the same thing. There were a couple of people who were paying attention to the Pearson materials and things like that. You have to break down your topic, and you need to pick the top 3 things that you're most interested in or that you feel are most important. Those become, right, the core element of your speech. Next, before you do anything else, you take those elements and you research them separately. Don't research them all together. You take each element that you've broken down and you do a search for it. You search on the library website, which we'll talk about. You search on Wikipedia, which we'll talk about. You can't cite Wikipedia, but it's still a very useful resource. And you do searches on credible sites, such as organizational sites that do what you do. You can do aggregate sites, which are sites that collect news from lots of different credible sources. Science Daily is one of them. So for scientific information, it's a huge trove, all of that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about credibility in the next slide. Finally, after you get all of this research, you've increased your expertise, you've increased your knowledge on the section. You've also borrowed the credibility of experts in that area who are writing and researching on it. Now you are ready to take all of that, look at it, and say, okay, now what am I going to do as far as writing a thesis? So going back to the platypus example that I gave in my very early speech, right, I clearly didn't do very good research on that. And so I came off sounding stupid because I didn't know what the Aboriginal tales were. I didn't know anything. I should have gone back before I used that example and looked at it. Now I did it purposefully to make myself sound stupid, to let you guys know that this is what happens if you don't research. So I would break down the platypus, and I would go and research that element, that folklore element, and I would research it separately, and that would inform what I'm actually going to say about it in my body paragraph and how it shows up in my overview. So use the research to guide your thesis and your overview. If you follow these steps in order, the speech basically writes itself. It's very simple. You can bang out a speech in 10 minutes if you get this process down. And that's the whole point of extemporaneous speaking, which is what we do in this class. You're not writing and memorizing a speech. What you're doing is mastering the elements of format. So you master the IBC format. Then you master that format in concert with rapid, fast research. So we talked about the body paragraphs, right? Claim, fact. That's how it should show up in your outline. So that's how it's done. Now we're going to cover source types. All right, so a primary source is the primary source that you use. You can use these other sources, they're fine, but in your body paragraphs, the primary sources are what needs to show up first as the definitive source by which you're basing your claim on. The definitive, you get your facts, your primary facts from a primary source. Right, so it's claim, you make a claim, fact, you find a fact, and then you use that source to support that fact. Your primary is your bread and butter. What primary sources are: academic sources, newspapers, and reputable magazines. Okay, these are the 3 that you'll primarily use. So academic has a database, right, which you have access to EBSCO, and what EBSCO does is generate other credible sources, and EBSCO will generate reputable magazines, they'll generate newspaper articles, they'll generate academic journals, and also your library has a list of academic books that are available online. You can find a chapter usually on what you're talking about. Newspaper. Associated Press, that's what AP stands for. Science Daily, I've mentioned it a lot. If you're doing a scientific thing, searching for your source on that website is great. And then finally, the New York Times. So, and that's just an example. It's not just the New York Times, LA Times, it's Washington Post, it's any of those major newspapers. Or even if you're writing about something local, it's a local newspaper. Believe me, I teach a journalism writing course. Journalists aren't experts, but they are experts at borrowing the credibility of other experts. So when you get journalism stories, you get quotes and you get information directly from the sources, usually that are the topic of the news. So the researcher themselves, the politician, him or herself, the doctor, him or herself, right? They're excellent at collecting those and having those words there for you. And then finally, reputable magazines. These are Time, Newsweek, Science, Psychology Today. There are plenty of good ones. So those would be considered reputable. Not reputable magazines would be like Cosmo and Men's Health and Maxim. On the border is like the Rolling Stone. If you wanted to do something for music, I would say they'd be pretty reputable for that. And they're reputable for other things too. So just, you have to make that judgment on yourself. But let me tell you, Cosmo is not a reputable magazine for anything ever at all at any point. It's great for light reading. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend stuff like Woman's Day or Red Book. Like I said, Men's Health or Maxim for guys. Just remember this. It really is the ones that are considered reputable by everybody. And they're usually really popular news magazines. So your secondary secondary sources are online web pages. You have to check and see if these are credible. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. And also Wikipedia. You cannot cite Wikipedia in your speech, but I'm going to give you guys a little trick. At the bottom of each wiki page are all of the sources that were used to create the wiki page. Those are the primary sources used to generate the page that you're reading. So Wikipedia provides a great overview of your topic. It also is great at directing where you should go in your research. And you know what? It's perfectly legal for you to go down to the bottom of that wiki and then completely pillage the source list. So pull all the sources up, check them, put them into your bibliography, and cite those sources. You have to cite the sources. You cannot cite the Wikipedia page, but you can use that wiki page to guide you. And this is a great list, great way of start building your primary sources list. So I use it all the time, and you know, I publish in academic journals. But if I don't know about something, Wiki is the first place that I go to. I start looking at their sources at the bottom, and then from there it sort of goes down a trail of me locating my own sources that are appropriate for academic publishing. And then finally, as personal. And you know, these aren't lesser than primary sources. In fact, they're great. But they can't be the only thing that you have. If somebody gets up and they're just like, in my opinion, it's, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, sure, great. But your opinion is nothing because you're not an expert. You're one of 6 billion people in this world. So only giving that, people are going to be like, okay. Now, the good side of that is that, guess what? Your opinion does count when you borrow the expertise of people. So this is the whole point. Your opinion, the whole speech should be your opinion, right? And definitely personal is a part of that. But in order to enhance your personal opinion through the speech, adding those hard-hitting primary sources will make you seem like, to put it bluntly, a badass. So if you do it well, people are going to listen to you. And if people listen to you enough, guess what? You become the expert. You give enough speeches, you do enough in an area, you become the authority on it. And this is like I said, this is like academics plus academics athletics, your training. So just remember that stories, examples, personal experiences are all great, but they cannot be the main source of information. They're wonderful for adding narrative qualities to speeches, though, and a lot of you guys did really well about telling stories about either yourself or about the people that you interviewed in the introductory assignment. I was really impressed with the storytelling ability of some of you guys. However, that's not enough. You have to have that structure, and you have to have that research attached in order to be effective when you're doing anything, really. Now we're going to talk about credible web pages. There's a lot of stuff on the web. I know it's probably confusing, but here's a general guide. Um, when you look up at the web address bar, you'll see either like .com, .org, or .gov. We're going to talk about those. So .com sites are shady. I wouldn't recommend it unless they are linked to like reputable publishers. So Science Daily is an aggregate for like science news. So they pull and then collect and archive lots and lots and lots of news stories from uh, lots of different places, but mostly publications and the Associated Press that actually cover science. So that's a reputable .com site. At the same time, you need to list the original source that the news source, like the news thing, was published from. They'll always have, we got this from X. Don't cite Science Daily. Cite the source's actual location or origin, I guess. Any other thing like Cosmo.com or whatnot, like don't do that. That is not credible at all. Does it mean that you can't use uncredible web pages in your speech? To some degree, yes, unless you are making an example of them for being faulty or whatnot. It really isn't a good idea to use .com sites. Really, really not very good at all. Okay, so .org, and also I need to add something to this. It's .org and .gov. .gov is a government site, so government, .government. The .gov is also highly credible. .org sites are also credible. However, because they're linked to an organization, they typically have what's called a bias, meaning that they offer info that supports a certain view, usually the view of the organization. So if you go to the NAACP and start pulling a lot of research from that site, you're going to get, let's say about the Ferguson incident, you're going to get a whole lot of information about Ferguson that supports the views of the NAACP. So you have to balance what you get with one organization with another organization. So if you wanted to get an opposite point of view, you could go to an organizational, a big organization site that supports police, right? Police work. They're two highly different views of what happened in Ferguson. So the police are definitely on one side and the NAACP is definitely on the other. Balancing those is what helps you to get a better view of exactly where your stuff is going. So that's one example. Alternately, a lot of times when these .org sites offer up stories or research, they're pulling from a study or something like that, or a set of statistics. You can actually track down that information. They almost always have a link to it. So once again, it's like Wikipedia. The org site is a great entry point, but it also, right, it's not viewed quite as highly as an academic source. It's not a primary source, I can tell you that. Wikipedia is also a great resource, but it's not a primary source. It gets it right most of the time, but there are tons of errors because anybody can edit it. So like some grandma in, Dubuque, what is that, Iowa? I don't know, I think it's Dubuque, right? She's editing the nuclear science page with, passages from Genesis showing how it's, something, right? That's not credible at all. And she can actually get away with that. She can do it just fine. And then leave the explanation, the creationist explanation of nuclear science on the nuclear science page. It doesn't necessarily mean that a creationist explanation of nuclear science, doesn't need to be on Wikipedia. That can definitely go there, but it doesn't go in the science section. It goes in another section, the religion section maybe. So just remember, anybody can get in there and do crazy stuff with Wikipedia, so you might be reading completely outrageous information. Like I said, they curate it really well. There are millions of people who submit to Wikipedia. I do corrections in Wikipedia. A lot of my colleagues who are professors do it. Basically in a battle against those grandmothers in Dubuque who are doing this. And sabotaging pages and stuff, but it might not get corrected for weeks, so you might be reading something entirely incorrect. That's why you have to go down to the bottom of the source, the bottom of the Wikipedia page. You'll see the sources, you'll see the bibliography. They literally have a bibliography, and then they always have the links to the information that they pull. It's freely available information. They're great at collecting that kind of stuff. Once again, great way to generate sources early on. So, quick thing, where do I find academic resources? You find them at the library, but you do not have to physically go to the library. That's a great thing. In fact, the library has a big old green bar in the bottom left-hand corner. I have a little picture of it here, and that's on the HACC front page. So you just Google HACC, it pulls it up. If you look at the bottom left, you'll see it. Big old green bar, it says library. Once you go into the library, there are tons and tons and tons of resources for you to figure out how to find sources. They're really good about creating instructional videos for it, but for the most part, really what you do is you go to the database search function and you go to the book search function. You set it up so that you only get texts that are available online, and you set EBSCO up so that you get articles from journals, newspapers, magazines, anything that you want, and then you just start typing in terms, those terms that are related to the elements of your speech. And you'll start generating a big list. So it's pretty simple. Finally, the bib. For your persuasive speech, in any speech you do after it, you've got to have a bibliography. Bibs can be done in two styles, MLA or APA. I write in APA. I don't care which one you use. It's always a huge battle. MLA is typically used by the humanities, like English and things like that. APA is used by the social sciences. So it's the American Psychological Association. By trade, when I'm not teaching, I am a sociologist, so I write in APA. There are tools that you can use to automatically grab sources off the web and these library databases, and then you can input them pre-formatedly into your Microsoft Office text. This literally means that there's a button up on the top, and I'm going to post a whole bunch of tutorials on how to do this. This will change your life. I wouldn't have been able to get through grad school and a PhD without it. Where when you're searching online, you find your web page, you pull up Mendeley, you type in the information in a set of preset boxes, you save that information, and then when you go to your paper, there's literally a little button up on the top. You click on it, it brings down a list. You like search for a keyword or whatever that you put in. It brings it up, and then you click a button and it automatically generates your entire bibliography for you. It is incredible. It saves a ton of time. And like I said, it's very exciting because you all are going to have to write various and sundry papers, and I'm sure most of you get real frustrated when you get it back and your bibliography is incorrect and you've got 10 points off. Well, this will end that fast. So here's a sample from a book chapter I wrote. This was generated with a program called EndNote. It's a lot more powerful than Mendeley. But it also cost a whole bunch of money. So I would highly recommend Mendeley. It's perfect for student and even grad student purposes. In fact, a lot of professors use it. It's not quite as hefty as EndNote, but then again, it's free. So that's pretty awesome. But your bib should look like this. This is what a bibliography looked like. So you'll see, right, there is an indentation on the bottom. We have the date, and then we also have the title. We have the journal it was pulled from. We have the edition, and the issue, and then we also have the page numbers. And so actually you'll see ASTD Staff 2012. This is a web page, right, that is pulled from a credible website. So you'll notice down at the bottom, available at, and then you give the URL. Like I said, you don't have to worry about any of this and typing all this in and getting it right and formatting it if you get Mendeley. It is a massive, massive, massive time saver. So just remember, I did this whole reference page literally as I was just writing. I was just bumping in sources directly from that database that I had formed before, and I never spent 1 second writing my bib. Not 1 second. The bib was done for me by the time I finished writing this article. It's incredibly fast. So you can thank me later. I would highly recommend that you use it, and it'll save you that 10 points for the rest of your life, really, and as long as you're in school when you're attempting to do your references in bib page. So you can thank me later. Anyway, that's about it. That's what I have to say for the research. So anyway, I will be back with another video that directly explains what an annotated bib is and talks about your assignment. So have a nice day.